All right, perfect. There we go. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. For this, the final webinar in our webinar series leading up to Career Day 2025. And this webinar, in case you don't know, is Interview Your Way to a Job Offer. Before we get started, I would like to do a territorial acknowledgement. We at Kwantlen Polytechnic University respectfully acknowledge that we live, work, and study in a region that overlaps with the unceded traditional and ancestral First Nations territories of the Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Coquitlam, and with the lands of the Kwantlen First Nation, which gifted its name to Kwantlen Polytechnic University. In the cause of reconciliation, we recognize our commitment to address and reduce ongoing systemic colonialism, oppression, and racism that Indigenous peoples continue to experience. Now, the series of webinars, as well as Career Day 2025, is brought to you by the Career Development Center. All the great folks here at the Career Development Center are behind this huge initiative. And I'd like to give a shout out and thanks to Jaden. Jaden is our Career Services Officer and is also on the back end of this webinar for any kind of technical issues that we might face, and also to pay attention to the chat. Now, if you have any questions during the duration of this webinar, please do just drop it into the chat, but if you can preface it with a capital Q, and we will get to those questions at the end of the webinar today. So again, brought to you by the Career Development Career Development Center. My name is Chantal. I'm a career coach here in the CDC. And in addition to career services, we also offer volunteer services, cooperative education, and employer relations. So feel free to visit us online to find out about all the fabulous services that we offer to KPU students and alumni. And a note for alumni or people that are just about to graduate, your services at the Career Development Center do not end when you leave KPU. When you graduate or transfer or do whatever it is you're doing, the services here do not end for you. We do not have a time limit. You can come back and use our services anytime. So you can continue to attend any of our hiring fairs. You can make appointments with career coaches. Anything that we offer to students, apart from co-op, even though you're no longer a student here, you are still welcome to use our services without any time restrictions. So it's important to know that. Please do also follow us on our social media channels. Put them down there at the bottom of the slide. So this, as I mentioned, this is the fourth webinar, the fourth and final webinar in our webinar series leading up to Career Day. So we started things off, we kicked it off with resumes and cover letters, putting your professional foot forward, Career Insights, fabulous panel hosted by the ER team, exploring careers beyond the courtroom and law enforcement. Then we had Navigating Career Day 2025 and Building Connections. And then we're wrapping it up with Interview Your Way to a Job Offer. And this is all leading us to the big day, the big events happening tomorrow on the Richmond campus and on Wednesday on the Surrey campus in the Cedar Conference Center. Just curious, how many of you have attended all four webinars in the webinar series? Feel free to drop your answer in the chat there. Did you make it out? Were you able to make it out to all four of the webinars? I'd be interested to know how many of you on the call today managed to fit all four in. Feel free to drop that in the chat. I did. If you say I attended, if you attended all four, just drop in I did. That'll be interesting to know. Jaden, I don't know if we're getting anyone typing anything in the chat.
Yeah,
anyone
we
who
do.
attended all
we
four.
have a couple. Yeah, we have Arjun here who's attended all four.
Okay, fantastic. Well, congratulations. And so you'll hear you all probably know this, but of course there's some prizes to be had. So if you attended all four, then you drastically increase your chances of winning one of our really great prizes. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the webinar today. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. What to do before the interview. So how to prepare. So this is like right before the actual interview, kind of the days leading up to, and then right before the interview. How to stand out and be a star during the actual interview. So we're going to break that apart a little bit. Going back to before the interview, but like way before the interview. So how to prepare, kind of make yourself a star and prepare some really great stories for the interview long before you even have an interview lined up. So we'll cover that. How to stand out after. So be memorable. The interview does not end when they stop asking the question. So how to be memorable after the interview using the SMART acronym, the SMART goal setting acronym to be a star overall in interviews. So we'll cover that, and I have some tips for you on that. And then we'll wrap it up and have some questions at the end. And again, any questions that you might have, please go ahead and drop them in the chat and preface it with a capital Q so that we know it's a question, and Jaden will read those out at the end of today's webinar. Okay, so I have a question for you. How do you feel about job interviews? Right? How do you feel about job interviews? Do you love them? Right? A lot of people love them because this is actually your opportunity to showcase how great you are. So I totally get it, but I also get how it can be very terrifying for some people. So excitement, you love them. Terrified, they scare you. C, you're pretty neutral, you're pretty calm, you don't get too nervous during interviews. Or D, you're not really sure how you feel about interviews. So drop your answer in the chat. How do you feel about job interviews? Do you like them? You feel pretty good about them? Are you a little bit nervous about them? Neutral or not too sure? What are we seeing in the chat, Jaden?
For the most part, I'd say most people are terrified of them, but we have a good mix of people that enjoy them or are neutral.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, that's not surprising to me. A good mix. Yeah, I mean, again, I certainly get it. You know, being terrified of interviews, it can be nerve-wracking, especially when you really, really want it, right? But I also appreciate those that say that you find them pretty exciting. Like I said, this is your opportunity to showcase your skills, and it's also bringing you one step closer to what I hope to be your dream job, right? Or at least a job that will eventually lead you to your dream job. So I get why some of you might be feeling some excitement there. All right, so just a reminder to make sure that your mics are on mute and your cameras are off. At the end of today's webinar, though, for those of you that have a question, if you prefer to ask the question with your mic off and your camera on, by all means, we can certainly do it that way, or just drop it in the chat. Okay, so right before the interview, so kind of like the days leading up to the interview, maybe around the time that you've, started applying for those jobs, it's important to understand anytime we're doing any kind of activity, we want to ask ourselves, what's the purpose? Like, what is the actual purpose? So going back to the resume and cover letter webinar, the purpose of a resume is not to get you the job, it's to get you the meeting, it's to get you the interview, right? And so once we understand that the purpose of a resume is to get the interview for a specific job, we then know that we really need to customize that resume for that particular job because its purpose is to get us the meeting for that particular job. Now, the purpose of an interview is there's three reasons here. So all the questions that they ask you in a job interview, it's to determine one or more of these three items. Can you do the job? Do you want the job? And what will you add to the company or to the team? Can you do the job? Do you want the job? And what are you going to add? So all of those three things combined equals success. So that's important to understand. The purpose of the interview, of course, it's to get the job, but it's for them to determine if you can do the job, if you want the job, and what will you bring to the team. So knowing that bit of information should help you in terms of how you prepare for the questions that you think they might ask you. Remind the company, remind yourself of the company's values. So what's important to them and their mission, which is what they do and why. Now, hopefully this is something you did back before you applied to this company, so that you can determine for yourself if this is even somewhere you would like to pursue and you would like to work at. So hopefully this is something you already know, but it's pretty important to remind yourself what's important to them and what do they do and why. That's all going to help you in determining, the types of questions they might be looking for you to answer in the actual interview. Dress to impress, but also feel good. You want to make sure that what you're wearing is something that you feel confident and good in. So make sure it fits you well, make sure it's clean, make sure it's ironed, and make sure that it fits with the overall um, look, if you could say, of the company, right? Make sure that you more or less understand what it is they're looking for, and then hopefully this is something that works with you as well, because you're going to be pursuing a company that fits your own goals, right? And so make sure that you dress to impress for that particular company, but more importantly, make sure you feel good in what it is you're wearing. Know where you're going. I know that this sounds a little bit silly, but if there's multiple locations, you really do want to make sure you know where you're going. And within that same context, will you be taking the bus? What time should you leave? Do you have enough money on your Compass card? Do you have money to pay for parking? Is there parking? All of those types of things are things that you really want to know, because these are the little things that can set us back on the day of. And we really want to make sure that we're putting our energy into how we present and how we answer those questions, and not in finding parking, rummaging through our bags for change or whatever it might be. Really make sure that energy is focused in the right direction. And then it goes without saying that an important piece of preparing is to practice answering interview questions that you think they would ask you, right? So in order to do that, you might need to identify what you think the questions might be based on the job posting, based on the company, hopefully based on some research you've done. Maybe you've done some preliminary research and you've conducted some information meetings, and you got some really good intel. So all of those actions will help you to identify some potential questions that the employer might ask. And then it's important to practice those. It's not really just enough to jot down your answers, but it's important to say them out loud. So I'll talk a little bit about mock interviews in a bit. All right, so I don't actually touch on online too much anymore. I feel as though we're all kind of pros at it. Whether it's attending class online or having online meetings or whatever it might be. So I don't spend a whole lot of time, but I think it's still important to highlight a few elements of an online job interview. Number one, make sure you're in a position where you feel professional. So if you're sitting in your bed, even if they can't notice it, you know that you're sitting in your bed. So sit in a proper chair. If you don't have the best background, maybe just a blank background is all you need. You can certainly use an image like I've done with myself for Career Day. But I do think that it's best in a job interview if you just have a simple background, or if you have a nice bookcase behind you, if you're lucky enough to have that, whatever it might be. But even just a plain wall behind you is sufficient. And that resting face. So a large component of the job interview oftentimes can be the employer or the hiring manager or whoever it might be doing a lot of talking. So telling you a little bit about the company, a little bit about the team, a little bit about the position itself. So you're going to be doing a lot of listening. And so if you're doing a lot of listening, what's your face saying while you're listening? Right. So that resting face, we've all heard of it. Oftentimes, people think that they don't look particularly friendly during while they're sitting there listening. So pay attention to that resting face that you have while they're doing a lot of the talking. Whether you are in person or not, this is a little bit more geared towards in person, but certainly when you're joining perhaps an online meeting, for online, I would not join, any earlier than 5 minutes prior. I would think even just a couple minutes right before the meeting starts is fine to join that meeting. But if it's in person, I would recommend that you arrive maybe 5 to 10 minutes earlier. early. Any earlier than that, if you're in your car, consider just staying in your car for a little bit. If you come a little bit too early, they might feel a bit rushed to come out and greet you. So arrive 5 to 10 minutes early. If you're waiting in a seating area, take the time to review your notes, perhaps review your resume that hopefully you've printed out for the occasion. I wouldn't spend a lot of time scrolling on the phone, so try to avoid scrolling through your phone. It's sending a message. And you never know, the person that greeted you, whether it's the front desk person or whoever, they might be providing feedback. In some cases, they might even be sitting on the panel, on the interview panel. So oftentimes they do have a lot of input, and they might report back to how you were actually sitting and waiting for the meeting. So consider just avoiding your phone. Make sure your phone is on mute, and just spend that time reviewing your notes, and make sure that you're greeting everyone you meet with a smile. Okay, so in the actual meeting, and of course, we're gonna get to answering questions, but in the actual meeting, I would recommend that you bring in a pad and a pen. So if you're having a virtual meeting, have that pad and that pen beside you, specifically with some keywords, things that you really want to make sure that you want to highlight during the meeting, but also to jot notes. And when I say notes, I mean really brief. So just a few things to kind of prompt you. So if they're talking and you are occasionally taking a note or two, looking down very briefly, coming back and maintaining the eye contact, it shows that you're interested in what it is they have to say. But it will also help you in perhaps writing that thank you note after the interview. We're going to talk about thank you notes, but writing that thank you note after the meeting, and then if you can reference something specifically that they mentioned in the interview in that thank you note, I think that would really work to impress them quite well. It's also handy if they don't have business cards to jot down their first name, their last name, and maybe their position. So you could do that perhaps at the very beginning of the meeting. And then this way you have their contact information to A, send them a thank you note, and B, follow up if need be. Be prepared for in-person meetings, for that handshake, or maybe there's an elbow or a fist bump. Kind of let them take the lead a little bit on that. And there might be nothing at all. They might simply motion for you to sit in a particular chair. But just be prepared for that kind of potential physical contact. And then don't forget to breathe and relax. Okay? That's important. They called you in because they're impressed with what they read on your resume, because the purpose of a resume is to get that meeting. So your resume has worked. They want to meet you, right? They're hoping this goes well too. During the actual meeting, body language often speaks way louder than words. So how we project ourselves really does make an impact. And in fact, it can make an impression within the first 3 seconds of meeting someone. So when you first walk into a room, how you present yourself, how you greet them, perhaps what it is you're wearing and how it sits on you. Is it clean? Is it, did you take care? All of these things are sending a message to the interviewer. The best thing that I can recommend is to kind of mirror their body language. So if they're a little bit more on the formal side, you might want to also be a little bit more on the formal side. If they're a little more casual, then you yourself can be a little more casual, but still one step up closer towards formal. Avoid things like, crossing your arms, touching your face. I'm a little guilty of that myself, but touching your face, using your hands to talk is actually recommended. It shows engagement and interest. So feel free to use your hands while you're talking, but try to avoid crossing your arms. And if you're an arm crosser, because it's just comfortable, maybe put a pen in your hand, and having that pen in your hand might prevent you from crossing your arms. Maintain eye contact. So, oftentimes there could potentially be a panel, meaning there's more than one person that's interviewing you. And if there's more than one person that's interviewing you, typically the way that it works is one person will ask the question, and then the next person will ask the question, and so forth and so on. While you're answering those questions, make sure that you're not just looking at the one person that asked that specific question. give equal eye contact to each of those panelists. Same thing for online interviews. So online meetings, it's really difficult. Right now, I'm looking straight into the camera, and it's not necessarily a personal kind of approach from my end. But if you were on the screen, chances are I would want to look at your face on the screen, and I'm no longer looking at you. Now, again, this is something that we're probably pretty used to by now, but in order to remind yourself to continuously look into the camera, maybe put a little sticky note beside it with a little smiley face. That'll remind you, A, look into the camera, and B, smile whenever you're perhaps listening or answering a question. And as I said, keep a pen in your hand. Now, nodding, smiling, leaning in, all of that is a demonstration of interest and engagement. So that's the body language that I was referring to that really does scream much louder than the words that are coming out of your mouth. So as they're speaking, nod, engage with them, lean in, ask follow-up questions. And also pay attention to their body language as well. If they're looking a little bit confused, or if they're squinting their eyes, maybe you're not speaking loud enough, or maybe you're not answering the question fully. So at that point, you can say, did I answer that question completely? Or were you looking for a little bit more information? Now, mock interviews, we do offer mock interviews here at the Career Development Center. So you can certainly book an appointment with a career coach. And in the meeting type, you can indicate that you want it to be a mock interview. Now, when I do mock interviews with students, I really like to try to make it as realistic as possible because they're not real. You're not having the interview with an actual employer, but I do try to make it as realistic as possible to the point where I ask you to dress like you would for that particular meeting. I actually get you to leave and then come back in again as though we're starting the actual interview. And I do research and ask questions that I think that they would ask you. And then after the mock interview, we debrief. We debrief from how you answered the questions to your body language and everything in between. So it's incredibly valuable to do that kind of practice. Now, you don't have to do it with a career coach. You could do it with someone that, a trusted friend of yours or a family member, as long as you know that they're going to give you authentic feedback. All right, answering the questions. So this is something that I see often in mock interviews, and even when I'm doing my own interviews, people, when they receive the question, they immediately feel the need to answer that question. And it's okay to wait. It's okay. In fact, it's encouraged to think, to listen first. So you hear the question, think about what they're asking, collect your data. So collect your information, your examples to support what you're just about to say, put them in order, and then answer. And I know this sounds like a lot of steps, but the brain is it's a pretty amazing thing. It can work through all of those items in milliseconds. So listen to the question, think about what they're asking, collect your information. So your examples, think about your examples from your time at KPU, from your part-time jobs, from your volunteering, from whatever it might be. Collect the information and then answer it. In fact, you can also grab your pen. They ask the question, jot down a word or two to remind you of what that question is. And as you're thinking, as you're coming up with an example or an answer to that question, jot down a word or two to remind you to stay focused and to stay on task with answering that question. Because what happens is people will answer the question right after it's been asked, and they won't necessarily have time to organize it and structure the answer. And so it comes across as really kind of fumbled, saying perhaps way more than you need to say. So take this into account, and that is something that we do in mock interviews. Right? I encourage that kind of gap and that break to gather your thoughts, to think about it, and to come back. And what you're doing is you're sending a message it's a subliminal message. You're sending a subliminal message to the listener that what you're about to deliver is quality. Now, speaking of which, you want to try to support your answers as much as possible with examples. So pull examples as much as possible, right? And then use the STAR technique. We're gonna touch on this in quite a bit of detail. So answering those questions. Okay, so there are a lot of really interesting, creative, common interview questions that they can ask you out there. So I just have a few there. I'm not going to go through each of these, but here are some examples of some pretty common interview questions. So these are not behavioral style questions that require a detailed STAR response. We're going to get to those. These are pretty common job interview questions. So one of them is, well, tell me, it's not really a question, but tell me a little bit about yourself. And for that, I like to use the acronym WEP. So that's where you discuss a little bit about your work, meaning that skill development. So, you understand what are the key skills. Can you do the job? Remember going back to the purpose of the interview. Can you do the job? This is your opportunity to tell them how you've developed those skills that will allow you to do this job. A little bit about your education, your professional development, any kind of training that you might have. Why did you choose that particular program? Going into that, so not just telling them what it is you're studying, because they know that, right? They know that from your resume, but rather, why did you choose that particular program? What are your goals with completing that program? And then any kind of extracurricular activities or involvement you had while you were actually a student. Those types of things send a really strong message as well. And then a little bit of personal. So that final letter P, a little bit of personal. So it could be why you're interested in this particular company or role. Now, this works really well if they're a very strong values-based company. That would work really well for the personal bit. What led you, how you're really matching those values without simply saying our values match, right? You really want to go into detail in terms of why. So maybe something happened that kind of pushed you to target companies like this or jobs like this. Or perhaps a fun fact about yourself. Remember, the question is, tell me a little bit about yourself. So you are more than your work and your education. So there might be some really interesting fun fact about you. And you can even say, and a fun fact about me is, I've jumped out of a plane 50 times in my life because I love skydiving, whatever it might be. Some kind of fun fact. What is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? And what are your salary expectations? So pretty common interview questions, but I'm guessing at this point, some of you are going, yeah, can we talk about number 4 a little bit? Can we talk about what the salary expectations? How do I answer that question? Well, I have a question for you. When you're asked about salary expectations, what do you say? Is it best to tell them that it's the job that matters and not the salary? So A, it's the job that matters, not the salary. B, give them a range based on your research. C, say you don't know, might not know at that point. D, give them an exact hourly wage or annual salary. Now, of course, in British Columbia now, it's the law that the employer is supposed to post, and I'm going to put supposed to in quotes because they don't always, but they are supposed to post what the salary is. But even with that, they will often post a range. And so we go into the interview sometimes not really knowing. So that's my question to you. And I'm going to put it over to Jaden. Jaden, do we have any answers coming in? So feel free to type your answer in the chat. What do you do when they ask about salary expectations?
Yeah, it's looking like the most popular answer here is B. So give them a range based on your research. After that, it would be D. It would be the second most frequent one.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. Congratulations, everyone. It is, in fact, B. Give them a range based on your research. Now, one thing that I want to say about that, though, is it's not just about giving them any range or giving them the range you've seen, but it's based on, it's more about giving them the range that you want. So rather than giving them the range that, that you've researched, identify for yourself, well, what are you looking for? What do you think is a fair salary based on what you're bringing to the table in terms of those three things, right? Do you want the job? Can you do the job? Do you want the job? And what will you bring to the company? So you are bringing, a good variety to this particular role. And so identify for yourself, where do you want to be within that range? So where are you willing, what's the lowest you're willing to take, up to what you think is a realistic high end of that scale. So keep that in mind as well. And of course, as we know, there's way more than simply money. There are benefits, there are vacations, there are other days off, shares in the company, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of other things that do contribute to our overall compensation package. But in this case, I'm just talking about salary. All right, so answering the question. So I gave you a few examples of common interview questions. Tell us about yourself, strength, weakness, what are your salary expectations? But employers really love to go a little bit beyond that. They love behavioral style questions. So behavioral style questions, for those of you that don't know, are times that they're looking for specific examples that you did something. That's kind of it in a nutshell. Tell me about a time when is oftentimes how those types of questions begin. Now, in answering those questions, it's particularly important to, yes, have an example, but to have a specific example. So when they say, tell me about a time when, they're not wondering if you've ever done something. They want to know that one time in particular that you did. So they're looking for a specific example, right? So to do that, you want to structure your answer using STAR. STAR is an excellent technique, and some of you might have heard this multiple times, but it's still a fabulous technique to answer behavioral style questions because it keeps you organized. It tells the story in its entirety, and it's just a really great structure to follow. So STAR is an acronym, and it stands for situation, task, action, and result. And you can even throw in a second R for reflection. So you can certainly add in an extra step and talk about and add a reflection piece. I'll address that in a little bit. So, situation, this is where you briefly describe the situation, who, what, where, when, the task. So you explain the task that you're working on or the particular challenge that you were facing, right? So situation, task, action, this is all about you. So if you're giving them an example of a time that you worked within a team on a project or something, they're not looking for we did this and they're looking for I. Right? They're not asking what your team did. They're asking for what you did within that team project. So this is your opportunity to shine. These are the actions that you took to alleviate the challenge or the conflict, reduce the task time, decrease cost, increase customers. And in that, you want to include the specific skills that you used and then the results. So at this point, sometimes we might have a really, really strong example, but the result didn't necessarily end the way we would have hoped. Don't adjust your story for the sake of the listener. Add that second R for reflection. So now in this scenario, this is actually what happened. And even though that action piece is super strong and you took all the necessary steps and you utilize these fabulous skills you have, the result just wasn't what you had hoped for. So this is where you could bring in the second R for reflection. Looking at it from the outside, I can see that, next time I would definitely do this and this, or this is the approach that I might take, or this is what I learned in the process. All right. So speaking of STAR, you might say to me, well, I don't have any stories. I don't have any work experience. So how am I supposed to give them any answers to any kind of behavioral style questions? Well, this is something you can prepare for long before the interview. So I put this little quote here. It's thrifty to prepare today for the wants of tomorrow. So this is where I go into long before the interview. So long before the actual interview, you want to set yourself up to be able to answer STAR behavioral style questions with strong STAR examples. So this is you now controlling your narrative for then. Okay, so doing your future self who's sitting in that chair across from an interviewer a favor by establishing some really strong star examples today, right? So through volunteering, through experiential projects, through having a strong, developing a strong portfolio, being an engaged student, and of course through interviewing well. So for those of you that came to the Navigating Career Day 2024 webinar the other day, last week rather, I had this stat there as part of the importance to volunteering and why we have some volunteer organizations coming to Career Day. So I just want to repeat this stat because it's particularly important. But it's also volunteering is also a really great way to help us develop some strong star examples. 82% of hiring managers indicate that they prefer candidates with volunteer experience on their resume, with 85% willing to overlook resume shortcomings. Listen, as a student, you probably have resume shortcomings. It's completely normal. You don't graduate with all this fabulous professional experience. So volunteering is a really great way to kind of build up that resume and to give yourself some really strong star stories. Taking it outside the classroom. So you're going to KPU, Kwantlen Polytechnic University. This is what we do, right? We take it outside the classroom. So there are some ways for you to do that. Take initiative and maybe add on your own experiential projects to your degree, diploma, certificate. So if you're in IT, consider developing or redesigning a website for a local small business. If you're in marketing, take on a social media account from a nonprofit and help them boost numbers. If you're in accounting, offer to get a new small business up and running on certain accounting software. And perhaps there's some others. There's some other ideas that you out there have already started in terms of developing your own experiential projects on your own. So if any of you have ever done that and started incorporating, feel free to put that in the chat. And maybe if there's time at the end of today's webinar, we can read out some of your thoughts on how you yourself can take those skills from the classroom to the real world. Portfolios. So, of course, portfolios and you can have portfolios through school, PebblePad, but you can also, of course, have portfolios through your LinkedIn account, right? So these are an excellent way to keep track of your accomplishments, connect with assignments. So taking those assignments, putting them into your portfolio, and really applying for the reader how that is applicable to the world of work. Make it look good, so include imagery wherever possible. Make sure that you personalize it and reflect on the learning, and then add those credentials as you get along, as you move along, rather. Be an engaged student. So while you're at KPU, take advantage of all the opportunities you can outside the classroom to really understand all that KPU has to offer. So have a look through the KSA. They have some really great clubs. Have a look at some clubs that you can join. If you don't see one, consider starting your own. This is something that you can present to the KSA, and perhaps you yourself can be the president of your own club. Participate in events. So pay attention to the events calendars, participate wherever you can, volunteer on campus, and super important, attend those office hours with your instructors. Oftentimes, when I talk about that in career coaching appointments, students do tell me that they think it's really just to discuss assignments or exams or whatever it might be, but it's actually way more than that. These instructors come from industry, they come from the world of work, and so it's really important to build those relationships with your instructors. Of course, they come in handy if you're looking for any kind of referrals and references and so forth for graduate school and beyond. But instructors can really provide some great leads and perhaps some referrals. And referrals are very, very good to land a job interview. So make sure to be an engaged student. So again, give yourself something to talk about in the interview. And this begins long before the actual interview itself, right? So Consider volunteering on or off campus, taking your projects, you're learning from the classroom to the real world through your own experiential projects, developing and maintaining those portfolios, and then being an engaged student. And then finally, during the interview, it's important to learn how to interview well. So this brings us back to STAR. So STAR again is situation, task, action, and result. Okay, and so let's look at one in action. So let's see what a STAR response looks like to a behavioral style question. And this is a little bit of a trick one because here I gave you an example. Have you ever managed a social media campaign? Chances are, if they ask this question, that it might be one of the preferred assets that their applicants have. So anyone that applied to their specific job should know whether or not this is something they would be asking you in an interview. Now, it's a close-ended question, so it doesn't seem like it's a behavioral style question, but in fact it is. It requires a story, right? And you're in social media. You should be good at this, right? If you're in marketing, you should be good at storytelling. So have you ever managed a social media campaign? So answer the question first to build a little bit of suspense. Yes, I have managed a social media campaign, and then you hit them with your killer response in the form of STAR. So this is what that might look like. So you build the scene by telling them the situation. While taking my 300 level marketing class, I thought it would be a good idea to apply some of the great skills I was learning in a place where it would have a positive impact. I really love animals, so I thought I would start there. Okay, there's your situation. So the task, how did you do that? I took some time to review the social media presence of a few local animal rescue societies and noticed one that seemed to be struggling quite a bit called Hounds and Homes. I reached out to them with a proposal. Action. During our initial meeting, I sat with them to determine their goals as an organization. They really had two: raise more money and get more animals adopted. From there, I was able to work with them to determine their social media goals, which then helped me to determine strategies, which included following, commenting on, and sharing content from popular influencers. We also opened a TikTok account and made the animals our stars. Results. Within the first 3 months, which was the timeline we had agreed on, I had developed a spreadsheet to track the analytics, allowing them to easily see which platform had the most traction and which post type garnered the most engagement. They were thrilled with the campaign and with the ease of taking it over. The overall engagement was up by over 300%. So there you have it. So that is STAR in a example using all the steps of the acronym. One thing that I like to share in this webinar that I recommend people do is develop a table for yourself that you can begin to put in examples that you can turn into STAR responses later on. So in this table, you can have some examples from your time as a student, maybe conflict resolution in team projects, or your time perhaps working part-time, working within a team, and whatever it might be. And then start developing some really great examples there that you can then adjust and edit depending on, because oftentimes examples will fulfill different types of questions. So the same example tweaked can answer a question around communication style as it can for conflict resolution, and you can just adjust it a little bit. But consider doing that. Consider opening up a little or starting a little bit of a table where you start to input some of that important information. It's about helping your future self in an interview. And then at the end of the interview, they always typically ask, well, do you have any questions for us? I recommend that you prepare about 4 or 5 ahead of time, but you wouldn't really want to ask more than 3. But make sure that they are authentic questions, that they have not been answered, and B, answered during the actual process of the interview, and B, that they are genuine, right? So This one, for example, is this a newly developed position? Asking that question will help you maybe in determining, do they tend to promote from within? Perhaps you'll find out in that answer that it's not newly developed. It's newly vacated because that person was just promoted into a different position. If it's a newly developed position, then it's also sending the message that the company is growing and things probably are looking well. Can you tell me about the team and their background? What's the biggest challenge in hiring for this role? And what are the next steps in the hiring process? After the meeting, and I would say immediately after, once you leave and you get in your car or you're back on the bus, analyze what happened in the meeting. What was your overall impression? What are some areas that you think you could have improved on? What were some particularly strong points? Did you ask about next steps? What are next steps? And then make sure, of course, that you follow up with a thank you note. It doesn't have to be anything particularly fancy. This could be something that you send in an email, preferably within 2 to 24 hours. I have been asked, should I give them a thank you note right then and there? It's a nice gesture, but it's probably relatively empty in that it doesn't necessarily address anything that was discussed in the actual meeting. And so, you took notes for that very purpose. So in your thank you email, keep it brief, but also mention something that you discussed in the actual interview. It tells them that you were engaged in the process. And so I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. So using SMART, so that's the goal setting technique to be a star interviewer. So let's say your goal is to, of course, improve your interviewing skills so you can get a job. You don't really have much to go on with that kind of goal. So turn that goal into a SMART goal, right? So make sure that your goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound, right? And so we can take that and turn it into, to reduce my interview anxiety for the next 5 days, I'm going to record myself answering 2 interview questions per day using the STAR technique. I'm then going to review and critique them. Okay, and this is what it might look like. There we go. Okay, so your final goal, let's say, is a rewarding career in sustainability. Well, in order to do that, you need to interview well, right? So we know the SMART goal to reduce my interview anxiety for the next 5 days. I'm going to record myself answering 2 interview questions per day using the STAR technique. I'll then review and critique them. Well, in order to do that, you need to you need to get the interview. So you need to make sure that you review your resume for ideas of what to showcase and where the gaps might be. From there, review targeted company websites and job postings so that you gain an idea for what it is they need so that you can adjust your resume so that you can get the meeting. Review job postings and responsibilities for jobs that you're going to be targeting. And then from there, right, develop a list of questions that you think they might ask you. Those questions are the ones that you can practice in order to improve your overall performance in a job interview. Now, we've developed a toolkit for interviews. This QR code will take you to Career Connection in the resource library where you will find the interview toolkit. You'll also find the networking toolkit there and the resume and cover letter toolkit as well. And a reminder that for all of you that stuck around for today's webinar, your name will be put into a draw to win a $20 KPU bookstore gift card. And we've done that for each of the webinars in the series. And then for the big event, we have a stamp card contest. So you'll be given upon entry into the hiring fair, you will be given a little stamp card. For every conversation you have with an employer, they will stamp that card for you. For every 5 stamps, your name gets put into the draw to win either a $50 KPU gift store bookstore gift card or a $100 Guildford Town Center gift card. You can have, I believe, a maximum of 6 entries into that. And a reminder that today's webinar is recorded and all of the webinars from the Career Day series will be uploaded probably by next week onto our YouTube channel. So you can go ahead and watch this and any other webinar over again, as I'm sure you're all super stoked to do. So there you go. And I'm going to put this back up, the interview toolkit, for anyone that might be interested in checking that out. So I'm going to stop talking now and grab a sip of water. Jaden, do we have any questions that have come into the chat?
Yeah, we do have one question here, Chantal. If it's possible, could we go back to the slide where it showed the salary question, the multiple
Yes, we
choice?
can. There it is.
Yeah, so we have a student here wondering, why would you not select option A, which would be tell them that it's the job that matters, not the salary.
Yeah, that's a really great response, and it's actually probably a pretty common one. But realistically, we all need money to survive on. I'm going to be very blunt about it. And if you answer this, I think most employers can see past that. Of course, the job matters. Absolutely, of course, the job matters. It matters for you and it matters for them. But salary also matters. And the question is, what are your salary expectations? So they didn't ask you, would you say that salary is less than, they didn't ask that. The question was, what are your salary expectations? And so the important thing is to answer the question with confidence. You can absolutely still say, you know, I am really interested in this particular position. I've done my research. I specifically, went to school for this program because I was interested in working with ABC Corporation. So for me, this role, my values are really governed by this position. But of course, we all need to survive, and so it's in my research, I think that it's fair to have somewhere between this and this, right? So you can certainly add that in as part of it, but they asked about salary expectations, so it's best to answer that question.
Okay, so we have another question here. How can I ask about the salary if the employer asks me to do trial work for a few hours?
Oh, right. Yeah. So, in that case, I would be very open and honest with them. I think it's important to start the relationship off with you demonstrating that you're confident, right? And so if they say to you, well, we'd love to see how you do this kind of work or whatever it might be, we'd love to see a demo. In many cases, there are a lot of employers that will pay for that time. And so you could say to them, okay, that sounds great. Now, this would take me approximately this many hours. Could we discuss salary for this? Like you could come out and ask. And I think it's really important to set the tone early on. Now, if you're not comfortable with doing that, or if the employer does not want to pay you for their time, then it's up to you. Then you have some decisions to make, essentially, if this is in fact the right match. But there are some employers out there that will ask you to submit, some kind of sample of your work. So what you can say to them is, let me just backtrack a little bit. If they ask you to actually do something like, can you please look at our website and establish a logo that you think would be appropriate for our company image? That is tricky territory because that sounds to me like you are in fact doing free labor for them. So in that case, I would suggest to them that there is going to be a fee for that, and you could say to them, well, this will take me X number of hours. This is something that you could potentially use for your own, business marketing. So I would be comfortable with this rate. Would you be okay with that? Would that work for you, or would you like to discuss it further? Alternatively, you could say to them, rather than do something specific for your company, I have something similar that I've developed, and I'd like to send that over so that you can get an idea for the level of my work. So right? So you can do something that you can send them over a sample of something you've already developed. But if it's something that they want you to develop for them and it's for their company and they could potentially use that, then I would in fact discuss an honorarium of some kind.
Okay. The next question we have is, if I'm asked a question that I do not know the answer to, what is the best thing to do?
Oh, and that'll happen, by the way. Yes, that's going to happen. So what you can do is you can ask to come back to that question, right? So if you cannot answer the question in the moment, you can get your pad, your pen, write the question down briefly, or at least a portion of that, and say, can we come back to that? And it's very likely they're going to say, yes, absolutely, we can come back to that. And if they happen to say, no, we need it answered now, okay, that's a little bit of a red flag. If they need it answered before you can move on, then you can just say, okay, I need to take a little bit of time to to come up with my answer. Is that okay? Something along those lines. Use your pad and your pen, write it down, think back. And if you really can't answer the question, then tell them, I can't come up with anything at this time. But usually when you say, can we come back to that question? They'll say yes. Now, when it comes time to you coming back to that question, hopefully you have an answer to that. Now, if they're looking for a specific example, tell me about a time when you did this, and you don't have a specific time that you did that, then give them a hypothetical. I have to say, I don't think that's ever happened, but if it did, these are the steps that I would take.
Okay, we have one last question here. If I saw a company that has a job offer and volunteer opportunities coming for the career fair, is it okay to tell them that I'm interested for both, or should I just go for the job opening?
Yeah, that one's really good. I think in that case, if you want both, I would say you need to choose one at that point. Particularly if you're going for the paid one, then chances are there might be a fine kind of ethical line that's being crossed. What I might recommend, depending on the situation that you're in, and we're all in different situations, of course, but it might be more prudent for you to consider the volunteer one first. Because what that will do is it will actually help build up your resume. It will help increase your network and increase your number of contacts within that company to increase your chances of getting employment with them at a later date. So if you're in a position where you could kind of choose, I see a paid opportunity, but I also see volunteer there. Um, but this is company that you're really particularly interested in. I would consider the volunteer one first because chances are that will increase your chances of success for a role with them later on. Now, you can certainly apply for the paid opportunity, and maybe if that doesn't necessarily work out, then you could pursue them for volunteering.
Okay, we're nearing 1 o'clock, so I guess this will be the last question. What would you say the main tips are for resume building when it comes to a part-time job?
The main tips for part-time, I would say one page is sufficient. There's no need for you to go beyond that for the part-time job while you're studying I'm assuming is what it is. Keep it relatively simple. You want to make sure, just like with any, whether it's professional or that part-time job, you really want to make sure that you're highlighting the skills that they might be particularly interested in. So for that part-time job, they're probably looking for someone who has good communication skills, who's reliable, who's going to show up, who might live nearby, right? Those might be more of the focus that those types of employers might be looking for. So that might be what you want your resume to focus on.
And yeah, that looks like that's all the questions we have.
Oh, well, there you go. We did it. Perfect.
Oh, we have a hand up.
Okay, we'll take that and then we're going to
Yeah.
wrap it up. Yeah. And if you want, feel free to unmute yourself and turn your camera on, or you can ask it through the chat.
Hello, is unrelated, but I was just curious why some online applications they ask for your, I guess, um, not exactly ethnicity, but they have like a range, like for example, Asian or
Mm.
and then other. I'm just curious why. Is it because? But I understand they have the like, for example, you can speak like other languages, and then I would enter it.
Yeah, in some cases it might be that, but I think for a lot of those companies where they have those questions at the end, they are, in my experience, completely optional, and they are to establish kind of an understanding of the demographic of people that are applying for those particular positions, and it might also be part of their DEI policy. So, ways in order to expand their workforce to be more diverse. And so there might be there might be more considerations given to certain applicants that maybe wouldn't necessarily normally get an interview for that particular job. So they might be looking to expand that DEI within their workforce.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so I think that's it. We're going to leave it there. I'm really hoping that I'm going to see everybody at Career Day this week, whether it's tomorrow at the Richmond campus or on Wednesday in the Surrey campus at the Cedar Conference Center. I'm really hoping to see each of you out there, and hopefully all of these webinars have helped you in preparing for this big event. Huge thank you again to Jaden, my trusty sidekick, Career Services Officer here in the CDC, and the rest of the CDC team. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at Career Day 2025.